Professor Laird here. I just wanted to take a few minutes to go over the guide to writing your paper. The paper assignment, the criteria for that is the same for all of my classes, regardless of what the subject is or regardless of what the topic of the paper is. And the three primary criteria that I use for grading your paper are following instructions, the quality of your syntax, which is your sentence structure, punctuation, and organization, and then, most importantly, the quality of the information that you're providing in your paper. So let's go ahead and look at that. The writing assignment is 25% of your grade. So you want to put some time and effort into that. The point of the paper is to demonstrate what you've learned and develop an appreciation for critical, objective analysis of whatever topic is that you're looking at. We want to read this credible information that you found, particularly these peer-reviewed academic journal sources, your legitimate news sources. Read as much as you can to learn as much as you can about that subject, and then your paper is going to describe to me what you've learned in an interesting and informative manner without the opinionating, editorializing, without the urge to insert the normative comments. The first thing you're going to want to do under the criteria of following instructions is read the syllabus again so that you're clear on the proper formatting requirements. All the papers have the same format. Times New Roman number 12 font, 1-inch margins, and double spaced in your paper. When we look at the sources, of course, your sources page will be single spaced for each site with one space in between each citation. But the body of your paper is going to be double spaced. The correct number of pages typically is 4.5 pages minimum. Anything less than that minimal requirement suggests that you've been putting minimal effort into it as well. Now, if you go significantly over the number of pages that are required, that is not necessary because I can get a really good idea of your writing skills and the quality of your information in that 4.5 pages. So do not feel like that you have to add more and more pages to it in order to feel like that you might get a better grade. That's not necessarily going to help you get a better grade, because editing your paper to that required length is part of your writing skill. You want to use the most interesting, useful information that you found and put that in a concise manner in your papers to make it the most interesting that it can be, and trim out all the additional padding. Don't need to overload it in order to feel like you're going to get a better grade. Not necessary. 4.5 to 5 pages minimum is fine. Also, part of the instructions is providing the correct number of references on your final bibliography page. The assignment typically requires a minimum of 6 references total, 4 of which are going to be peer-reviewed academic journals. Extremely important, because those academic journal sources that you find are going to be the heart, the foundation of your paper. We've talked about formatting for those as well. So if you do not follow the instructions as required, that's going to hurt your grade right off the bat, even before I start reading it. So that's extremely important to any endeavor that you do. You've got to follow the instructions that are required. The second criteria is the quality of your syntax. That's the grammar of your writing, the sentence structure, the organization, the punctuation. What I would recommend highly is to proofread it. Proofread it, proofread it, proofread it again. The more you proofread it, the more you'll catch these typos and other errors, clumsy sentences. Do your sentences make sense? Are they complete sentences? Are they grammatically correct? Are they clearly stated? Because when you're reading it back to yourself out loud, You catch those things. Wow, this sentence doesn't quite make sense. It's a clumsy sentence. I don't want to have to reread a sentence 3 times just to figure out what's being said, because that distracts from the quality of your paper. You want to use punctuation effectively. As you're reading it back to yourself out loud, does it make sense to pause there for effect? If you were saying that or reading that to somebody, you wouldn't just run on through it, blah, 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 without any pauses. You'd want to have a flow. You'd want to have a feel to that when you're reading it out loud, so your writing wants to be able to demonstrate that. If it sounds natural to pause when you're phrasing your sentence, somewhere in your sentence, we'll use a comma. I've seen several papers over my career as a professor that did not have one single comma in the entire paper, and you do not realize how difficult that paper is to read when there's no separations, when there's no logical pauses for you to see while you're reading it. This is what we call the flow in the narrative. That aids in the clarity for the reader. You want to have that readability. That readability is really hard to define, but when somebody is reading it, they can tell very quickly that this is very readable. So that's why the proofreading will help you catch that. You also want to use some logic in the organization of your narrative. Don't start me off right in the middle of your topic. Be logical when you're in your introduction to kind of bring me up to date. What are we talking about here? What exactly is the topic you're going to be writing about? You need to know that right up front. Even the title of your paper is going to give me a good idea as to what you're going to be writing about. And then in your intro, you want to start at a logical beginning point and then bring me up to date as to where we are right now, which is going to be the focus of your analysis. But you can use your peer-reviewed sources as well as legitimate news sources to go back and look at some history, chronologically bring me up to speed. That makes logical sense to do that. Assume that the reader does not know the topic, so bring them along progressively so that they understand what you have learned. Use paragraphs effectively in order to break up those passages into those logical sections where you're talking about this, and then you're changing your tone or changing your subject just slightly. You start a new paragraph. That makes it more readable. That makes it easier for the reader to follow your narrative there. Don't try to overword it to the point where you're twisting your words around yourself and making the sentences more confusing. I call this here, don't drift off into attempts at rhetorical grandiloquence. Get to the point, be concise, focus on the most useful information that you have learned about that topic, and just explain it to me in the most interesting, descriptive way. You know, this is not a creative writing class. This is analytical writing. You want to get to the point and tell me what you've learned, describe to this passage to me in an interesting manner. Above all, do not cut and paste anything. Not only is that plagiarizing, but that's lazy when you just copy and paste and drop a big chunk of something into your paper. You want to paraphrase these passages in your own words, because that's where learning really starts to occur. If you read these articles, in some cases, these articles are pretty sophisticated and pretty dense as far as their scientific jargon or the statistical analysis that they're using. And if you can understand what they're saying and then explain it to somebody else in your own words, that means you are learning. That is extremely powerful when you can do that. And once again, you want to proofread it and then proofread it and then proofread it some more. Proofread it out loud. Proofread it to your dog. You want to get that feel for how that thing is reading to somebody else. Most importantly is the quality of the information that you're providing, the quality of your sources, and that presentation of your narrative, particularly as to how interesting and informative it is. What we're providing here is unbiased information that describes what you have learned from credible sources on that topic. That is the key to this paper. Read a lot, learn a lot, and then describe to me what you've learned in the most interesting, informative way that you can do it, in order that so that the reader wants to keep reading that because it's interesting, they're learning something from it, it's readable. For this analytical paper, you're going to want to dig deeper into the whys, what fors, how comes. You want to keep asking yourself, why, what for, how come, what caused this, what resulted in that, what are these studies, what are they studying, what are they measuring, what did they find, what are their conclusions, what are their recommendations. You want to keep asking what, why, how, because that means you're absorbing, you're learning, and then the more you learn, the more you're going to be able to put on that paper. And I guarantee you that 4.5 pages is going to fill up very quickly because you're going to find a lot of information that you're going to want to share. And in most cases, the most important challenge is editing it down to that length that provides your most useful information. You want to find what are some major decisions that have been made, some major events on that, some major behaviors that result from this. You might even could find some major pieces of legislation that have been passed that address this, or major court decisions that have been ruled on this topic. You want to look for social costs versus benefits, unanticipated consequences that result from these behaviors or that result from the policies that have been passed. This is another trap that students fall into, is that they just want to tell me what they think. They may provide one sentence from their source that might describe something, but then they can't resist the urge to tell me what they think about it. Let me give you my little normative opinion on the side there. Avoid that at all costs, because not only is it useless, it's distracting from interesting analysis. You don't want to just talk about stuff. You want to describe what you've learned to me. You want to avoid generic definitions and broad assumptions. Be descriptive. Provide useful and interesting details and explanations. Give an interesting example here and there, a real-world example that you found in your readings that helps describe what's going on. That don't just tell me what you think about stuff or that you've heard that people do this or do that. No, find me a specific, interesting example that you can share that helps explain that in real-world terms. Use data and statistics and surveys and polls every now and then. Don't just tell me that, oh yeah, most people think that you're supposed to do blah, 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 blah. No, find an actual survey that actually says 71% of Americans believe blah, 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 blah. Use statistics and use data rather than just telling me what you think or what you've heard. You want to find some, as I said, perhaps some laws passed, court decisions, historical information to better describe what is actually happening and why. Again, avoid the broad generalizations that need some sort of substantiation or that cannot even be proven. That's another bad habit that students can get into, is just make a very broad assumption of what they've already been told or what they believe or what their stereotypes of this or that are. Avoid those and stick to what you've learned. At the end of each passage, here's a very important piece of sourcing information here. At the end of each passage where you have been describing what you've learned from one particular source, you'll provide a very simple in-text cite at the very end of that passage that all it needs is just the name of the author and the year. For example, in parentheses, Jones 2014. That's all I need within the text of your paper. Because at the end of that paragraph where you've explained this article to me, then at the very end of it, that just tells me that it came from Jones 2014. Then I'll quickly go back to your final page, to your bibliography page. I'll go down alphabetically, and I look at the Jones 2014 source and I go, all right, that looks like a good source. It came from a very, very prestigious journal. And then I come back to your reading where I left off and then continue the reading. But that's all that I need within the text of your paper. That alerts me to where that previous passage came from that you just described to me. Once again, paper is not a forum to spout your opinions. Avoid them at all costs because they are useless and they are distracting. This is an analytical exercise. Want to know what you've learned? Avoid confirmation bias. If there's things about that topic that you already believe is right, wrong, good, or bad, avoid those. Avoid the normative rhetoric and avoid the hyperbole, which is the over-exaggerated claims that in most cases can't even be proven. Now, personal experience. This is also called anecdotal evidence. That can certainly be useful insight into your analysis, but you don't want to weight your paper or revolve your paper around your own personal experiences. Your own personal experiences could be used as a supplement to what you are learning. If you are reading about something and you say, wow, this actually happened to me. Well, that's worth sharing, right? Some of your own personal experience. But that should be a minor supplement to your paper, not the focus of your paper. And certainly not an excuse to opinionate about things. We want to know what critical analysis means. Critical analysis has actually been defined. After you read a peer-reviewed academic journal written by someone who's considered an authority on a subject, the point is not to tell me what you think, but describe what the author thinks from their findings. Tell me what the author has found, not what you think about it. Be an analyst for this case, not an activist. Being an activist is great. When you get out there in the world and you want to be an activist and try to change the world for the better, that's great. I highly recommend that. But I also highly recommend that you learn about it and become very much informed on the topic first. And that's what we're doing here. We want to analyze things and share what we've learned. And so therefore, be an analyst here, not an activist. The assignment is not about what you think is right, wrong, or good about. It's about learning and understanding why and how things are the way they are. Policy recommendations that you find are based on what you've learned from your readings. As for your cited sources, there's several sources out there that you want to avoid. Avoid blogs of somebody that just has a website that's telling everybody what they think. Anybody can do that. Have no idea what their credibility is. Avoid dictionaries and general information forums such as even history.com is just a general information website. You're going to be able to find the information that you need when you read enough of these credible sources, whether it's news reports or even historical analysis from peer-reviewed journals. You're going to be able to find that information without going to these generic websites and look up just generic definitions. You want to avoid those. You want to avoid partisan opinionators. You want to avoid agenda-driven, partisan-leaning websites. Wikipedia is not a source. Now, obviously, you can use Wikipedia to perhaps get some ideas where to go, but Wikipedia is not the original source. It is just a forum where people post information, and therefore they would then provide where they got that information from, and then you would go to that original source and check it for credibility. And if it's a good, credible source, then that's certainly would be a possibility. Now, Google Scholar is also a useful source for a lot of academic articles. You just want to be clear that it is a peer-reviewed journal, but Google Scholar is really taking a lot of effort to try to provide academic articles that you can reference without necessarily having to go through the library database. But I would certainly start at the library database. You'll have hundreds of thousands of articles to choose from. If you just go to the library databases, that should be fine. If you If you go to the library database and you see the title of an article that sounds interesting, but it does not provide the full text for you, or if it does not provide a PDF file for you to access, well, then you might jump over to Google Scholar and see just by chance that you might see it posted somewhere, the full article, because the Google Scholar could provide that for you every now and then. Now, as far as quotes go, use quotes sparingly. You do not want to overload your paper with quotes because, first of all, that's lazy writing. And if you put too much quotes of a source in, then I might as well just go read that source instead of your paper. You want to use them strategically. For example, if you use a good quote from a reputable source at the end of a passage, that could effectively sum things up at the end of a passage in their words, where you're reading that passage and, wow, I couldn't have said it better myself. So I'm just going to use their quotes to wrap up this one sentence at best, just to wrap up this particular passage. And at the end of each quote, you have to be, these have to be cited. At the very end of that quote, you will add one thing to your in-text citation. In addition to your Jones 2014, you'll add the page number from that article that quote came from. That's all that I need at the end of a quote. And if I haven't seen Jones 2014 yet, I will go back to your bibliography page. I'll go down alphabetical order of your citations. I'll look up Jones 2014. That looks like a good source, quoting from a very reputable scholar there. You do not want to use too many quotes. You don't want to cut and paste huge quotes into your paper. Now, we've already talked about sources. I would recommend that you review both of the videos that have already been posted, the general information on the paper video, as well as the video that is talking about the peer-reviewed academic journal sources. So we should be pretty clear on the academic sources. You've also got some examples here of an edited volume where you would start with the authors of that particular article that was in that edited volume, and then this describes where it was found in what book, and that book was edited by this person. And then just like with your regular book, you'd have the place and the publisher. The book citations is very simple. Authors' names, last name first, the year that the book was published, and the title of that book in italics, because the book is actually what's being published. That's what determines what the italics is, followed by the city and the publisher. So the citation for a book is in the same order, same general order of the peer-reviewed sources, just a little simpler. I've already talked about the websites. You want to make sure it's a credible website, whether it's an official publication from a government agency or a news magazine or a polling website. You just want to do a little bit of checking to make sure it's a credible website. And every credible website is going to have at the top of the page a little section about who they are and what their purpose is. You've got to be careful because some of these are very partisan driven and very biased in what they are providing. So you want to check that carefully as well. But for the website, it's the same general order. You want the author's last name first. Now with the website, you're going to want to put the last name first and the actual date that it was posted, because things are being posted every day on that particular website. But again, the title of that article is in quotation marks, followed by the name of the website. Then the only major addition here is the web link. And the web links for these types of websites are mercifully short. And then, in most cases, it's just the title of the article is also the website length as well. The access date, and all I need is the month in general on that. Some postings or some publications don't have a specific author, so you can actually put who the organization was that that published it, and then once again the year, that's the name of the publication, and then who is posting it. In this case, City University of New York, followed by the web link. So those are some examples of sources for websites. All right, so I would recommend that you read through this guide more than once before you finalize your paper, so that you will have everything covered before you submit it.